Snow pelted the windshield like shards of glass, each gust of wind slamming against the metal frame with violent insistence. Emily's hands clutched the steering wheel, her knuckles pale and rigid, as if letting go would send her spiraling into the grief she was barely holding together. Her breath fogged the inside of the cab in shallow bursts, the cold crawling under her coat and settling deep into her bones. The engine had died an hour ago, the heater minutes after. Outside, the Montana landscape was smothered beneath thick, blinding snow. Inside, Emily sat in silence, her wedding band still on her finger, a photo of her husband tucked inside the glove box. She hadn't spoken a word in days. She didn't need to. The silence screamed louder than anything else. There was no destination, just distance. Distance from the house with his boots still by the door, from the coffee cup that hadn't been moved, from the echoes of laughter now replaced with aching quiet. She'd packed nothing but a coat, a canteen, and the keys. The road stretched like a scar across the snow-covered world, each mile putting more space between her and the life she no longer recognized. Grief clung to her like the cold, heavy, inescapable, and numbing. She wasn't running toward healing. She was running because standing still hurt too much. The storm roared with ferocity, shrieking through cracks in the truck like some wild, feral thing. Emily had curled into herself, eyes closed, mind drifting in the direction of memory and pain. Then came something else, a scratch. Then another, faint, unsteady. Her eyes opened. It wasn't a storm. It was softer, desperate, a whimper, barely audible, but enough to slice through the numbness, like a whisper in a church. She straightened, heart suddenly alert, and glanced toward the passenger side window. Something or someone was out there. At first it was just a blur, a shift in the swirling snow, like a ghost refusing to be seen. Then eyes, amber, deep, exhausted. A large German shepherd pressed against the frost-covered glass, his fur matted with ice, one paw slightly lifted in a limp. Snow clung to his whiskers and ears, his breath fogging the window just inches from her own face. But it was the eyes that held her. Not pleading, not wild, just tired. Emily's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, the storm outside fell. Away, it was just the two of them, both broken, both lost. She stared, unblinking, unsure if the image before her was a cruel trick of the mind. Grief had played stranger games. Her husband's voice still echoed in her dreams. Could her mourning heart be cruel enough to manifest this? She leaned closer. The dog didn't flinch. He just stood there, breathing heavily, snow melting on his muzzle. Watching her, Emily's hand hovered over the door handle, trembling. 1,000 reasons screamed not to open it, but her heart numb as it was whispered just one. He's alone too. The metal was ice cold under her palm. She didn't think so. There was no logic, no plan, just motion, as if something primal and buried deep had taken over. The door creaked open, groaning against the wind's protest. A blast of snow shot in, biting at her cheeks, but she didn't move. The shepherd stepped back slightly, cautious but not afraid. They stared at each other. Two strangers with storm clouds in their eyes. Then, without command or coaxing, he limped forward and stepped inside. And just like that, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of grief, Emily was no longer alone. The wind howled like a wounded animal as Emily flung open the truck door, bracing herself against the snow that pelted her face like icy needles. But the storm wasn't what made her breath hitch in her throat. It was the shape slumped against the snow-covered tires. A large German shepherd, coated in slush and blood, collapsed the moment the door opened, as if he'd used the last of his strength just to get there. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud. Emily's boots crunched on the snow as she dropped to her knees. His ribs stuck out, his breathing shallow. One eye barely opened as if pleading, not for help, but for peace. Emily reached out slowly, her gloved hand trembling. The dog didn't flinch, he was too weak to resist. When she turned one of his paws over, her stomach clenched. The pads were split open, raw and crusted with dried blood, packed with ice and dirt. Every paw was the same, torn, battered, and scarred from a journey far longer than any animal should endure alone. There was no collar, no tag, no sign of anyone who had cared for him, only the silent evidence etched into every wound he had. Walked miles, for what or whom, she didn't know. But he had made it to her. She scrambled into the back seat, tossing aside the box of groceries she'd just bought, and pulled out an old flannel blanket. Her fingers were stiff from the cold, but she worked fast, tucking it gently around the dog's frail body, careful not to press too hard on the wounds. As she looked down at him, shivering, silent, barely clinging to life, her throat tightened. Maybe it was the way his body curved into her touch, or maybe it was how still the storm felt for a second. Either way, her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she whispered, "Hang on, boy, just hang on." The wheels spun for a terrifying moment before the truck lurched forward. Emily gripped the wheel hard, headlights swallowed by the endless blur of white. She glanced in the rearview mirror. The blanket had shifted slightly, revealing the dog's heaving chest, still breathing. Barely. Her knuckles turned white as she leaned forward, eyes scanning the snow-cloaked road. Every mile was a prayer, every heartbeat a countdown. And though the blizzard screamed around her, her thoughts were calm and crystal clear. Don't you dare die on me. Not after you made it this far. The world outside vanished. Only her and him remained. The warmth of the clinic was a blur as they rushed the dog onto a table. Emily stood back, arms crossed, holding her breath while the vet worked. Minutes passed, then the vet looked up, face tight. He's dangerously dehydrated, starving. His muscle mass is wasting. This didn't happen overnight. Emily swallowed hard. He's been out there a while, the vet added quietly. And someone didn't just lose him. Someone let him go. Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. This dog had a story one someone wanted forgotten. When the vet finally said he was stable enough to leave, Emily wasn't sure what came over her. She simply reached for the leash and led him toward the truck. He followed instantly. No hesitation, no resistance. Just one step behind her, every move synced like they'd rehearsed it 100 times. In the passenger seat, he rested his head on her lap. That's when she said it softly, like a secret between them. "Shadow, that's your name." He didn't move, but somehow she knew he'd heard it and accepted it. The cabin lights glowed through the snow-draped trees as Emily parked beside the porch. Shadow stepped out slowly, favoring his left paw, but following her without pause. Inside, she set up a bed by the fire and poured water into a metal bowl. "Just for tonight," she murmured, avoiding his gaze, "until we find who you belong to." But when he laid his head on her foot and let out a quiet sigh, she felt something stir in her chest. A lie, soft and sweet, had already taken root. The fire crackled gently. Emily sat in silence, sipping tea. Shadow curled at her feet. He wasn't sleeping. His eyes were fixed on the doorway, ears twitching with every gust of wind outside. There was a search for him. Not confusion, not fear. Longing. He wasn't running from something. He was looking for someone. Emily reached down, her fingers brushing the fur behind his ears. He blinked slowly, then leaned into her touch. At that moment, she realized maybe he had found what he was looking for. Maybe so had she. Every morning, just as the kettle started to hiss and steam curled into the cold kitchen air, Emily noticed its shadow was there, sitting just outside the bathroom door, not scratching, not whining, just waiting. He never crossed the threshold, as if he understood the boundaries of grief, as if he knew that inside that room was where Emily lingered the longest each morning, sometimes in silence, sometimes sobbing quietly, sometimes just staring at the tiles where her husband used to stand while brushing his teeth. And yet Shadow waited, his ears perked up at every sigh, his tail thumping gently when she opened the door. He never expected anything. He just offered presence, steady and silent. Emily used to close the door completely, but lately she left it cracked open, enough for light, enough for him to hear, and somehow enough for her to breathe. It was during a rainstorm when Emily found it, an old, worn leather boot, soaked and muddy, resting at the foot of the stairs. Shadow stood nearby, tail wagging tentatively. Her heart clenched. It was David's boot, the one he always wore during winter hikes. Lost, she thought, years ago. She knelt, rain misting her cheeks, but it wasn't the weather that made her eyes sting. She picked it up slowly, brushing the wet leather with her fingertips. A laugh escaped her lips, sharp and sudden, followed by tears she couldn't stop. Shadow sat beside her, leaning gently into her shoulder. In that moment, the grief didn't feel so lonely. Somehow, this creature, stranger with his own secrets, had pulled a piece of her past out of the shadows, as if reminding her, some things are never truly lost, only waiting to be found again. Nights were the hardest. The house breathed differently. After sunset, quieter, heavier. Grief didn't shout. It whispered in corners. Emily often fell asleep mid-tear, the weight of silence suffocating. But that night, she stirred from a dream, not from fear, but from the warmth pressing softly against her hand. Shadow, he hadn't made a sound, just gently nudged her palm with his nose, eyes watching her in the dark with a quiet understanding no words could match. Her fingers curled slightly, brushing the soft fur of his muzzle. She didn't speak, didn't need to. In the stillness, they both just stayed there, her breath slowing, his heartbeat steady. It wasn't comfortable in the way a person might offer it. It was simpler, more primal, like he knew sorrow by scent and offered his own heartbeat as a lullaby. That night, she didn't cry again. She simply slept, hand resting on something real and alive. It started small, a comment here and there, while she edited photos in her studio. That light's all wrong, right, boy? She'd mutter, not expecting an answer, but Shadow would tilt his head, ears twitching as if he understood the language of pixels and pain. Then came more. David used to say, sunsets were too cliché. He hated warm filters. Pause, a chuckle. I used to hate that he was right. Shadow didn't respond, of course, but his gaze never wavered, steady, curious. Safe. Soon, Emily found herself narrating full days to him, her frustrations, her wins, even the silence between thoughts. He never judged, never interrupted, and somehow, talking to him filled the quiet David left behind, not as a replacement, but as a witness. Whether she was curled up with a book, sipping tea by the fire, or knee-deep in dusty files in her studio. Shadow was there, not in the way a shadow follows light, but in the way roots grow toward water instinctively, patiently, always near. He didn't demand attention. He simply shared space, his breathing a soft rhythm in the background of her days. Emily found herself glancing down often, just to see if he was still there. He always was, and though she never said it aloud, she began to count on it in him. It began with a glance at the clock, 6 p.m. sharp. Every evening, without fail, Shadow would rise from his nap, stretch languidly, and walk to the front door. He'd sit, eyes fixed toward the hills, ears alert. Sometimes he'd whine softly, other times he just watched. At first, Emily thought nothing of it. Maybe it was dinner time, but food didn't interest him then. As days passed, she started watching him. There was something haunting in his stillness, as though he were waiting for someone or something. "Who are you looking for, boy?" she whispered once, kneeling. Beside him, he didn't move, just stared into the twilight, like a memory lived in the trees and wind. It tugged at her, that ritual, not just his butchers now. Watching him watch the hills, the quiet ache in his gaze echoed the emptiness in her chest to souls, waiting for what would never return. The questions started to settle in her mind like fog. Every evening's watch, every restless sigh, the way Shadow scanned the horizon like a soldier standing guard. Who had he lost? What was he waiting for? Emily began to wonder if his loyalty belonged to someone else, someone before her, someone he had followed to the ends of the earth, or been separated from. She imagined a little boy, or an old man, maybe someone like David, with a soft voice and calloused hands, and yet he stayed. Whatever or whoever he was waiting for, Shadow chose to stay with her. That truth brought comfort and unease, because love often comes with questions that have no answers. She posted flyers around town, found dog, German Shepherd, gentle, intelligent, answers to no name but listens like he knows yours. She checked the cafe, the grocery, even the shelter. No one claimed him. A few folks called out of curiosity. One offered to adopt him, sight unseen. Emily said no to. Quickly, Shadow wasn't hers, not really. But the thought of letting him go tightened something in her chest. Still, the silence from the world only deepened the mystery. Where had he come from? Why did he choose her porch that night? And why did it feel like fate? A knock at dusk. Her neighbor, gruff and blunt, stood on her porch, hat in hand. "You be careful out here," he said. "Some say wild dogs have been roaming the hills, packs, mean ones." Emily glanced at Shadow, who had risen silently, placing himself between her and the stranger. "He's not wild," she said, voice firm. The man nodded slowly. "Maybe not, but some things out there are." He left with a warning glance. That night, Shadow paced, eyes sharp, muscles taut. Emily locked every door, but somehow it wasn't the outside she feared, it was what the dog remembered, and what might be trying to find him again. Some nights he barked, not at squirrels, not at passing cars. At the hills, it wasn't frantic barking, it was mournful, purposeful, like he was calling to someone or warning them away. Emily stood at the window once, watching him. "Who are you talking to?" she whispered. Shadow turned briefly, as if he'd heard. Then he returned to his post, ears pointed like radar toward the unseen. The wind answered with a howl of its own. It made her shiver because sometimes silence carries secrets, and sometimes dogs remembered things better left forgotten. She didn't notice the shift at first, how her coffee didn't taste bitter anymore, how she actually laughed when Shadow chased his tail into a wall, how her chest didn't ache constantly. Healing wasn't a loud thing. It crept in during shared silences, walk in the frost, the feel of warm fur beneath idle fingers. Shadow hadn't saved her, but he had stood still long enough for her to catch her breath, and in caring for him, she'd begun to care for herself again. There were still questions. So many, but she had stopped asking aloud, because some connections weren't made of answers but of presence, of trust built in silence. Shadow watched her less like a lost dog, and more like a chosen one now. Still, on certain nights he'd stare into the hills as if tethered to something she could never see. Emily sat beside him, and though neither spoke, both knew they were no longer alone in the world. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the sharp crack of twigs beneath pounding paws. Suddenly, without warning, Shadow darted off into the black woods like a bolt of lightning. "Shadow, no." Emily's voice shattered the stillness. Desperate and raw as she sprinted after him, her heart hammering in her chest. She stumbled over roots, her breath catching in the cold air, every second stretching into an agonizing eternity. The dog she had come to love, the companion who had saved her in ways words couldn't capture, was slipping away into the unknown. Thorns and branches lashed at Emily's face, tearing at her skin and clothes, but she barely noticed the stinging pain. Her world had narrowed down to one single goal: find Shadow. Each step was a battle, her legs heavy, lungs burning yet. She pressed deeper into the tangled forest, disoriented by shadows that twisted and danced. The night seemed endless, and with every rustle, every crack, her fear swelled. What if she lost him forever? What if this wild chase ended in heartbreak? After what felt like hours, Emily's eyes caught a faint silhouette sitting motionless in the moonlight. Shadow was there, quiet, unmoving, facing an ancient, crumbled house. Its blackened beams half buried beneath ivy and moss. The scent of smoke still clung to the air, ghostly and bitter. The house looked like a relic from another lifetime, swallowed by decay and silence. Emily's voice softened, trembling. "Shadow, what is it? Why here?" But the dog did not move. His eyes were fixed on the ruin, filled with something deeper than fear or curiosity, something like memory. Her gaze shifted beyond Shadow, and there, half hidden by wild grass and tangled weeds, lay a small makeshift grave. A rusted toy truck rested atop the soil, its paint chipped and faded, beside a wooden marker crudely carved with the initials M.A. Emily's breath caught, a chill that wasn't from the cold crawling down her spine. The grave was silent but spoke volumes: loss, love, sorrow. The air felt heavier, the night suddenly thicker with meaning. Who does this belong to?" she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Then Shadow's voice rose, a long, aching howl that cut through the forest like a knife. It wasn't just a dog's cry. It was a lament, a plea that held a lifetime of pain. Emily's knees weakened, and tears spilled freely as she sank to the earth. In that howl she heard heartbreak, devotion, a silent story told in grief and hope. Shadow was mourning, not just the grave, but something far deeper. Her heart ached. For him, for whatever had been lost and still lingered in the night air. From the edge of the trees, A figure emerged, slow and deliberate. An old man, his face etched with deep lines of sorrow and wisdom, approached quietly, as if drawn by the same unseen thread. His eyes held the weight of countless stories, and yet his presence was calm, grounding. "I've watched you both for some time," he said softly, voice rough but kind. "There's more here than you realize." Emily looked up, hope and confusion swirling in her gaze. The man knelt beside the grave, as if honoring a memory only he truly understood. With trembling hands, the old man traced the carved initials. "This is Michael's resting place," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "Not where he sleeps, but where his memories live. The fire took much, but not everything." Emily's breath hitched. Memories resting. The man's words hinted at a story buried beneath the ashes, a story of survival and loss entwined with the loyal dog sitting beside her. The night suddenly felt like a fragile bridge between past and present, between pain and hope. The old man's eyes glistened as he recounted a tale that seemed pulled from the shadows themselves. Years ago, a fire ripped through this home. A family torn apart. A boy named Michael lost to foster care, and his dog Duke, left behind but never forgotten. His voice cracked as he described the boy's broken heart and the dog's unwavering loyalty. Duke stayed here, waiting for Michael, guarding what remained. But when he was taken from this place, Duke ran away, searching. Emily listened, heart pounding with every word. This was no ordinary dog. Shadow was Duke. The dog had a past, a purpose, and a mission carved into his very soul. The man's gaze softened, heavy with the weight of years. Duke escaped from his new home. The cold walls of foster care couldn't hold his spirit. He wandered for years, following a scent only he could smell, the boy he loved, the family he never gave up on. Emily's eyes widened as pieces clicked together. Shadows, strange behaviors, his restlessness, the way he always seemed. To listen for something beyond her understanding. It was all a quest fueled by hope and love. A dog defying the odds, driven by a bond no distance or time could break. Silence settled between them, heavy and profound. Emily felt the weight of Duke's loyalty settle over her like a second skin, fierce, unyielding, heartbreaking. She reached out, brushing a trembling hand over Shadow's fur, feeling the quiet strength beneath. His mission wasn't over, and neither was the story they shared now. The dog who had saved her was chasing his own salvation, a reunion long overdue. Emily's chest tightened with a mix of awe and sorrow. She wasn't just a caretaker anymore. She was part of something bigger, a living chapter in a tale of love and resilience. Then came the revelation, a spark of hope in the night. The old man's voice lowered, almost a whisper. "Michael lives. He's been adopted, far from here, 200 miles away." Emily's heart skipped. Could it be true? Shadows, restlessness. His nighttime howls. They weren't just pain. They were longing, a beacon calling out across the miles. The impossible was suddenly within reach. A boy, a dog, separated by fate but bound by an unbreakable thread. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, blurring the world around her. Her heart was torn between holding on to Shadow, the dog who had healed her fractured soul, and setting him free to complete his journey. The choice was agonizing: protect the companion who had become her lifeline, or honor the deep, desperate love that drove him beyond her own needs. The night held its breath as Emily stood at the crossroads of love and sacrifice, knowing that whichever path she chose would change them both forever. Emily's breath hitched as the familiar roadside sign emerged through the early morning haze. Her hands, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trembled with a mix of anticipation and fear. This was the moment she had both dreaded and hoped for, the place where a chapter of Shadow's past waited to be uncovered. Her heart weighed heavy, laden with uncertainty about what awaited her and the boy connected to this dog she had come to love like her own. Emily parked the car slowly, eyes fixated on the playground where laughter and shouts filled the air. Children darted across the field, their carefree joy a sharp contrast to the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Her heart pounded like a drum, each beat urging her forward. Then she saw it, the small, worn building that held the answers. The place where she would finally meet the family who had given Michael a home. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for what came next. The office felt both cold and intimate as Emily sat across from the adoptive parents, her hands clutching a worn photo of Shadow and Michael. Words spilled out unevenly, tales of a dog's rescue, a bond forged in hardship, and a past cloaked in silence. Her voice cracked with the weight of years, tears welling as she shared the truth, how Shadow had once been Michael's protector, his silent guardian through darkest days. The room filled with a fragile hope, a bridge slowly being built between strangers united by love. The bell rang, and the playground erupted with the joyful chaos of children flooding out of the school. But one boy stood still, his eyes locking onto a figure at the gates, his breath caught, mouth slackening in disbelief as something deep and raw stirred within him, an echo of a memory long buried, a whisper of a name only his heart recognized. The boy, Michael, felt the world shift as his gaze met Shadow's familiar form. Duke. Michael's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with disbelief. Then, as if released from years of waiting, Shadow surged forward, his paws pounding against the ground in a rush of pure joy. The two collided in an explosion of emotion tears, mingling with wagging tails and warm embraces. Lost souls reunited, their hearts beating in sync after years of separation. The bond they shared was raw, unspoken, and stronger than time or distance. From across the playground, Emily stood frozen, hands trembling as she covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Tears streamed down her cheeks, blurring the scene before her. This moment, their reunion, was more than she had dared to dream. Silent awe wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Shadow had finally found his place, his family, and the boy who had never stopped loving him, just as Emily began to turn away. Her heart aching with the bitter sweetness of goodbye, a small voice called out, "You found him." Michael ran toward her, arms wrapping around her in a hug that spoke volumes of gratitude, wonder, and connection. In that tight embrace, Emily felt a healing warmth she hadn't known she needed. She wasn't just a stranger who reunited a dog and boy, she was part of their story now. That evening, Emily sat at a warmly lit table, surrounded by Michael's family. The air was filled with laughter, thanks, and stories shared over home-cooked food. Michael's parents expressed their heartfelt gratitude, their eyes reflecting relief and happiness that words could scarcely contain. In this simple meal, Emily found a new kind of belonging, an unexpected family born of compassion, courage, and second chances. Days turned to weeks, and Emily's visits became a comforting rhythm. She laughed with Michael, watched him grow, and found healing in the warmth of friendship that blossomed between them all. The past's painful shadows softened as new memories formed, memories stitched together by love, trust, and the quiet promise of forever. What began as a painful goodbye transformed into a beautiful beginning. Months passed. On a gentle spring afternoon, Emily strolled through the park, a small, playful puppy bounding at her side. Hope sparkled in her eyes, and though her heart still carried the bittersweet imprint of Shadow's love, she embraced the future with quiet strength. The park was alive with possibility, and so was Shire Woman, forever changed by a dog whose spirit refused to be forgotten. Emily paused, the breeze soft against her skin, and smiled a smile filled with peace and gratitude. No dog could ever replace Shadow's unique light in her life. Yet she knew in her heart she had been part of something extraordinary, a story of love and loyalty that transcended time, a story that would live on forever, in memories, in hearts, and in every step she took forward. The golden light spilled across the room, casting long shadows that seemed to dance quietly with the memories. Emily's fingers gently traced the worn leather of the collar, each scratch and faded spot telling a story of journeys and survival. The weight of silence was thick around her, but in that stillness, she felt the echoes of a bond that had reshaped her life in ways she never imagined. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a living testament to love's unspoken language. As the sky turned a soft pink, Emily's heart swelled with gratitude, knowing this small piece of leather held more meaning than any words could express. Emily whispered this truth aloud, her voice barely more than a breath. She had thought. She was the one saving Shadow, offering shelter and care after his long, harrowing journey. But the more time she spent with him, the clearer it became. Shadow was the healer, silently mending the cracks inside her that grief and loneliness had carved. His steady gaze, his unwavering loyalty, had pulled her from a place of despair. In his quiet presence, Emily discovered a new kind of strength, the kind born from unconditional love and trust. They had found each other in the darkest moments, not as savior and victim, but as two souls learning to heal together. The incredible trek Shadow had taken was more than just survival against odds. It was a pilgrimage of memory, guided by this invisible thread of devotion. Each mile he crossed was a silent promise to the boy he loved, Michael, the boy who had waited for him with hope in his heart. Shadow's paws had felt the pain of the road, but his spirit never faltered. This was not a journey of aimless wandering. It was the brave march of loyalty, of a heart refusing to forget where it belonged. Emily understood then that Shadow's story was not about distance, but about the unbreakable bond that time and separation could never sever. Watching Shadow move with quiet dignity, Emily felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. His courage wasn't loud or boastful, it was steady, patient, and pure. In his calm presence, she found herself breathing easier, the heavy grip of sorrow loosening its hold. Shadow's journey had become her own beacon of hope, showing her that healing was possible, that pain could soften with time and love. With every wag of his tail, every trusting look, Emily's heart opened wider, and the shadows of grief began to retreat. Through his eyes, she saw the courage to face the future, to embrace life again. Emily smiled softly, knowing that love's power was beyond human understanding. No matter the distance, no matter the trials faced, love had an innate compass always guiding back to where it truly belonged. Shadow's weary paws had carried him through storms and silence, but his heart had stayed steady, anchored by love. It was a love that transcended pain and distance, a love that promised no one is ever truly lost when they carry love in their soul. Emily realized then that this love wasn't just a story, was a truth written on every heartbeat they shared. The journey that began with a stray dog on a cold night had led to something far greater than either of them could have imagined. By helping Shadow reunite with Michael, Emily rediscovered parts of herself she thought were gone: hope, purpose, and the courage to love again. Shadow's journey had mended her broken heart as much as it had bridged the gap between two lost souls. In their shared story, Emily found a new beginning, a life filled with meaning and connection. And as the last light faded from the sky, she knew this was only the start of a love story that would live on forever.